Hello everybody, and welcome back to a brand new video. In today's video, we'll be taking a look at the 2024 presidential election from the angle of a potential Biden versus DeSantis matchup. I think this will be a pretty important video, and I think it's actually going to be quite relevant because DeSantis is expected to announce a presidential bid some point within the next week, possibly even tonight. So I want to start by previewing a potential general election matchup. I'll talk more about the primary as we get more polling data and as we watch the debates over the summer and kind of see where the electorate takes shape. But I want to talk about how I think if the election were to be held tomorrow, DeSantis would do against Biden. And we're just going to get right into it here. Again, a lot of this is going to change. We still have a year till 2024, and a year ago, Democrats were in a much different position than they are in now. So, again, take this with a grain of salt, but I think if the election were to be held tomorrow, this is where we'd be at. So, we're going to start by filling out the states that would be safe for Joe Biden like we always do. And again, these aren't really going to change. Obviously, DeSantis is a different candidate from Trump, but the coalitions are, for the most part, very similar. And so you're going to see that here because, again, Biden would have 191 safe electoral votes, essentially the same amount as he has against Trump. DeSantis, I think, will have a bit more than Trump did. I don't know if I gave Trump South Carolina as a safe state in my latest prediction, but either way, I think DeSantis will do better broadly in the South than Trump, so give him South Carolina as a safe state. But beyond that, the battlegrounds are essentially the same. And so before we talk about the true swing states, I do want to just get a few more states out of the way here. Likely states: Biden wins New Mexico, Minnesota, Virginia, Maine at large, Nebraska 2nd District. These are all states that I think he'd do very well in against DeSantis, same as he would do against Trump. DeSantis, same thing. He'd win Alaska, Kansas, Iowa, Ohio, and his home state of Florida, as well as Maine's 2nd District. So the battlegrounds, you have 137 electoral votes that are contested, and Biden's at 222, DeSantis at 179. And the only state here that I'm not putting in the likely Biden column that I would have against Trump is New Hampshire, and I think that's a good place to start our battleground kind of analysis. And New Hampshire is really interesting because it's a very white state, very educated too, but it will vote for Republicans occasionally. And the thing is, Trump is not the guy to win New Hampshire. I would be stunned if he won it in 2024, and I think DeSantis would have a better chance. Now, again, I'm not saying DeSantis is going to win. I think he loses it by 4 or 5. But if you look at the swings that occurred in 2020, they were all across New England, really. I don't think a single county in, some in northern Maine did, but not a single county in New England, aside from Maine, swung towards Trump. Not even rural Vermont or Connecticut, moved towards Trump in 2020. And so that's pretty significant because it shows Trump is just a really bad candidate for the Northeast. And so DeSantis, on the other hand, I don't really think is a good candidate for the Northeast either, but I think would kind of reverse some of the damage because Trump lost New Hampshire by so much that I think DeSantis would do better, albeit not really by too much. And it wouldn't really matter because I don't think he wouldn't really contest New Hampshire. He wouldn't really need to win it, so it wouldn't be a state that he'd be focusing too much on. Michigan is similar. It's bigger than New Hampshire, and I think DeSantis will focus on it to an extent more than New Hampshire. But realistically, Michigan is a blue state. It was close in 2020. Trump only lost it by around 3%, which I guess is a pretty impressive showing in retrospect. But again, last year we saw Republicans get crushed in Michigan. They lost the governorship by 11, Secretary of State race by 14, Attorney General race by 9. They lost control of the state House and state Senate for the first time since the 1980s, and they lost every competitive congressional race and got spooked in the 10th district, which is a district right north of Detroit. They were expected to win by up to 7 or 8, and they only won it by half a point, and the Democrats didn't even invest in it. So Michigan was a disaster for Republicans last year, and I think that they're really just not into it right now. I would be surprised if they try to win it in 2024. Obviously, they'd like to have it. If they were to win Michigan at the presidential level, it would make it really hard for Biden to win. But it's unrealistic. They want it, but I don't think they're going to be able to get it. When you look at how Trump did, he only kept it close because he did really well in these rural and working class areas, and I think that's a strength that he certainly has, but DeSantis doesn't really have that to the extent that Trump does, and I think right now I wouldn't bet on DeSantis doing very well compared to Trump in those areas. He would do probably better in the western part of the state, Grand Rapids, Kalamazoo area over here, because these areas did swing against Trump by a good amount. Like, we look at Kent County, home of Grand Rapids, that swung 9% towards Joe Biden. Kalamazoo swung 6% towards Joe Biden, which are pretty significant swings because they're bigger than the statewide swing. So I would say that DeSantis could do better in those areas, but he'd be trading it off for underperforming in other areas. Either way, I doubt he'd win Michigan. It's a blue state, and I don't really think any Republicans equipped to win it in 2024. Now the good news for DeSantis is that I think he's going to win Texas, and that obviously Texas is a big prize for DeSantis, which is good for him. But he needs Texas. If he loses Texas, he's not winning the presidency. Period. And Texas is interesting. I think, because it's so big, you can make a lot of arguments, but let's just look at like the swings here. So in 2020, Trump did really well along the border with Mexico because rural Hispanic voters, specifically those without college degrees in South Texas, in this area, swung massively towards Trump. We saw historic performances for a Republican with these voters, and he actually won back a lot of blue counties, and it didn't really mean too much because those counties don't have a ton of people, like, say, Zapata County, which was a Clinton county that he flipped in 2020, only cast around 4,000 votes. So realistically, it's good for Trump to win. Like, it's always good to get more votes, but the Mexico border region of Texas isn't big enough to offset losses in Dallas or Austin, which are way bigger. Again, the city of Austin has there's the Austin Metro Air Base has the same amount of people as the entirety of like the border region minus El Paso. And so I think when we talk about the swings in Texas, both DeSantis and Trump, I think, would be able to handle them, but we would see a closer result. And what I mean by that, if I'm not being clear, is Biden will do better in Texas this time than he did last time, but I don't think, no matter who it's against, it'll be enough to win it. I think he'd have a decent chance of winning Texas against Trump. I wouldn't bet on it. I still think he'd lose it by a couple of points. But I think Trump could this is a scenario in which Trump completely collapses in Dallas and Austin, and then we see Biden win Texas by 0.2%. DeSantis, I don't think, has that downside. He certainly would have Texas going blue would be in the cards, but it wouldn't be a scenario that I could even, really talk about. So I would say certainly that we would see Biden, doing better in Texas against Trump than against DeSantis. But either way, I think we see a similar 4-point loss no matter what happens. And so that brings me to another state that I want to talk about that I think Biden would lose but do better, but do worse against DeSantis in. And that's North Carolina. North Carolina is interesting to me for a couple of reasons. First of all, it's a state that a lot of people disagree with me on. I said that Trump was going to win, or not going to, because I'm not 100% confident, but I said Trump's probably going to win North Carolina in 2024. Right now, the consensus is that Biden's going to win it, from people aside from me. Now, my rationale is that Trump won North Carolina in 2020 by 2%, and it's an uphill climb for Democrats, and the thing is, they're not going to be able to climb it in 2024. Talk to me in 10 years, I might change my mind because the coalitions will be different, but when you look at North Carolina in 2020, Biden did not do well enough, here last time to warrant, optimism for the future. And I know I'm talking about a Biden versus Trump matchup, but I think the same thing applies to DeSantis because he would be the Republican nominee. And again, when we talk about where Biden did well, he did very well in Charlotte, he did very well in Greensboro, he did very well in Raleigh. In those three cities, he performed about as well as they could have hoped for. The issue for Biden is that in the areas in the north, specifically with black voters in rural areas, they're collapsing. In fact, in 2022, Democrats did really well in the suburbs of North Carolina, better than anyone could have expected, and they lost because they could not turn out black voters. Now, you could say, that was a midterm in a presidential election. Black voters are going to turn out much more. And that's a fair argument, and I think to an extent you'd be right. But Democrats need they need higher turnout with black voters than they got in 2020. And in North Carolina, they got pretty good turnout with black voters. They made up, a decent share of the electorate in North Carolina. And what we know now is that for Democrats to, really end up winning North Carolina, they're going to need Herculean turnout from black voters and continued swings in the suburbs. And for that reason, I'm not sure I'd be able to bet on Biden winning it against DeSantis. So I think we'll do better in the suburbs than Trump. So North Carolina, it's a good bet for Democrats long term, don't get me wrong. But in 2024, a year from now, they need a lot of things to go right for them. And it's possible. It has, 35-40% chance of happening. It's not outside the realm of possibility. But I think right now, if you're looking at it from a probability standpoint, DeSantis would be favored to win North Carolina by, I'd say, a point or two. And that's kind of my belief on the state in general. Same goes for Trump, although I think he'd win it by a point less than DeSantis. So now I want to talk about Pennsylvania, because Pennsylvania, I think, is good for Biden right now. Pennsylvania is interesting to me because I think Republicans really need it. Because right now, if you assume Biden wins Pennsylvania, Republicans have to win these next 4 states. And that's possible, but for reasons we'll get into in a second here, it's not great for them. And so Pennsylvania is interesting to me because it's just very, I don't want to say stagnant, but I think the range of outcomes here is really small. So I think in 2020, Biden won it by a point. And he did that while doing pretty well in the Philadelphia suburbs, but he had nothing to be happy about in Western Pennsylvania. He did well in Pittsburgh, I guess, and he flipped Erie, but he did not do nearly enough in these Western counties. And what we saw was that in 2022, John Fetterman, who won the Senate race by 5 points as a Democrat, did 10% better than Biden in almost all these Western counties. And we also saw that Fetterman was able to hold on to his margins in the Philadelphia suburbs. What does that prove? That proves that Democrats have more room to gain, at least in the near future, not in the long term, so don't take me out of context, but in the near future, Democrats have more room to gain in Western Pennsylvania, in the rural areas outside of Pittsburgh, than they do to lose in Philadelphia. And what I mean by that is Democrats in 2022 showed that they have a really good base in Philadelphia. John Fetterman did not run in my opinion, he did not run a campaign with the suburbs, and he still matched Biden. He outran Biden in 2 of Philadelphia's 3 suburban counties, and he matched him in Chester. He did exactly the same in Chester, right? And those areas are the future of Pennsylvania's politics. And if Democrats can continue to do well in those areas, because they're left trending. In 2020, Biden did 7.5% better in Chester, 5% better in Montgomery, 3.5% better in Bucks. That's a really good showing for him. And if he can do that again against DeSantis, he'll win Pennsylvania by 5. Now, the issue is I think DeSantis will do better than Trump in the suburbs, not by enough to win Pennsylvania, but I think he'll lose it by 2 as opposed to 3.5 or 4. And so for that reason, it would be closer, and it would be he would be in striking distance. But again, not the bet I want to make. Kind of like the reverse North Carolina, in that it's possible, but it's just not. When you look at a map, it's not a great strategy to predict it going the other way. It's not like a good underdog bet. There are other underdog bets I would like in 2024, but Pennsylvania going red, not one of them. And so that brings me to Georgia, because Georgia is also a state I feel pretty good about if I'm Biden. I'll put it in the tilt column because I do want to express that I think I'm a bit more cautious about Georgia than I am Pennsylvania. But I just want to take a look at these swings in Atlanta. So in 2020, Biden won Georgia by 0.2%. It was incredibly close, and on paper that would make it seem like DeSantis could absolutely win Georgia. And the thing is, he could. But when you look at this map, it gets really bad for him because the majority of the population's in this blue circle. And the thing is, all these counties swung left. Every single county in the Atlanta metro area swung towards Biden. And so when you have that happening consistently, and we saw that in 2022, Raphael Warnock did better than Biden in a lot of the counties surrounding Atlanta. And that's a really good sign for Democrats because, again, if they can do better than Biden, who did really well to begin with, that means they have more room to grow. And so these counties are growing in population, they're getting bluer, they're getting more diverse, they're getting more educated, and as a result of that, they are trending towards Democrats. And I think DeSantis is a better fit for these counties than Trump is. Again, when you look at the suburbs, these are educated areas that are left-leaning in general. And so I think DeSantis would do better in those counties than Trump would, but not by enough to win Georgia. Georgia swung 5.5 points to the left in 2020, and if it swings that way again, DeSantis couldn't win it. Trump would do worse than him, but he still would not win it just because we have these insane trends for Democrats in the Atlanta area. So unless DeSantis can really, really magically reverse the trends of the past, 8-10 years in politics in Georgia, he's going to have a really hard time getting it back because, again, he'll probably do better in these rural areas out here, but he's not going to be able to do well in Atlanta and, the suburbs either. So that's why I'm pretty, I guess I'm pretty confident Biden would win Georgia. Now, the good news for DeSantis is that I think he wins Wisconsin, which I know doesn't mean much because he's already lost the election, but I'm going to give him Wisconsin and Nevada. And to me, it's really interesting how he could do in Wisconsin and Nevada because in 2020, Biden did win Wisconsin, but it was very, very, it was really circumstantial. And I say that because he won Wisconsin because he got really good turnout out of Madison, and he did well enough in Milwaukee. For him to win it again in 2024, he'll have to do even better in Madison, which is possible. Democrats have been doing well in Madison as of late, no doubt about it. But he'll have to do even better there and he'll have to, really squeeze everything he can out of Milwaukee, because Democrats in Wisconsin are losing ground really quickly in the western part of the state. Like the border with Iowa and Minnesota, it's getting redder, and he's probably going to, La Crosse will probably go to single digits, same with Eau Claire. And these cities in the West are going to trend towards DeSantis or Trump, no matter who the nominee is. And so Democrats to kind of combat that would need to do well in the cities out on the east, like Madison and Milwaukee. And they can do that. It's certainly a possibility. But Wisconsin is a very white and rural state. And we saw just last November that they did reelect Tony Evers as governor, but they were open to voting for Ron Johnson, the Republican senator, and they did prefer Republicans in congressional races and at the state legislative level. So I think Wisconsin is a red tilting, at this point, Wisconsin's a red tilting state. Democrats can still win it. Tony Evers won it. Democrats, did overall decent the last year in Wisconsin, but it's a red tilting state, and I think that's a pretty clear fact at this point. And Biden won it in 2020 narrowly, and I just think that's not a feat he's going to be able to replicate against DeSantis. Nevada is different because it's not it's a blue tilting state at this point, but it's kind of similar in a way, right? Like the state itself is different from Wisconsin, but the reasons I think that DeSantis would win it against Biden are similar. Biden would need to reverse trends in Clark County. Clark County swung 1.5 points towards Trump in 2020, and that was despite the fact that he was not expected to do well at all in Clark. Like a lot of the swings we saw in say suburban Atlanta towards Biden were expected. Like everyone thought he was going to do well there. Clark County was supposed to, trend towards Biden, and it trended towards Trump. And so what that means is that for the future, Republicans are going to do really well in Clark, especially based off this trend, and that's mostly because they've been making inroads in the city of Las Vegas. Now, the suburbs themselves are a mixed bag for Republicans, but the city of Las Vegas is a very, very underrated city, I guess, for Republicans in the future, because they're doing better there every year, specifically because they're doing well with working class voters. And nationwide, working class voters are moving towards Republicans, but that also applies to Hispanic and Black voters in the city of Las Vegas, many of whom are, work middle class jobs, are likely to support someone like Donald Trump in the future. So I think, Donald Trump himself would struggle outside of Las Vegas, but because he's pulled, again, Trump himself, I think, is a bad candidate for Republicans. I think he's unelectable, but he did bring in a kind of a new coalition of voters to their party, and I think that DeSantis would benefit from that. He'd kind of get the best of both worlds, because he'd be getting, more voters in the suburbs than Trump would, but he'd also be getting a lot of the working class voters in areas like Las Vegas that Trump pulled in initially. So Nevada, I think DeSantis wins by the skin of his teeth. Arizona's really close. I'm just going to give it to Biden because, again, Democrats did well there in 2022, and Democrats also performed they won they won the Senate race, they won the governor's race, they won the Attorney General race, and they won the Secretary of State race. And I think after that, it's kind of hard to bet against them, especially because we saw Hispanic turnout drop, and if Hispanic turnout goes back to where it was in 2020, they would have won by more. We also saw left trends in the suburbs of Phoenix. Maricopa swung 5 points towards Biden. That's a pretty good swing. I don't think DeSantis can overcome that. To me, Arizona is the closest state for 2024 in a DeSantis versus Biden matchup, so he could have absolutely overcome it. I wouldn't be surprised at all. But I want to go with the trends. I'm going to believe that Arizona is going to keep trending blue like it has been for the past 3 elections. And for that reason, I think Biden wins it narrowly against DeSantis. But again, DeSantis could absolutely win it. So, as we wait for a DeSantis announcement, this is where I stand. I think it's a really close election, Biden and DeSantis. But I think right now, DeSantis just short of Biden. He'd need to do something fundamentally. He needs something to change fundamentally for him to win. I think right now he's close, but not there. So thanks for watching. Let me know what you think, and I'll see you all in the next one.